Hey, everybody, tune in to Recent Tartarian.
Recent Tartarian. Recent Tartarian. Recent Tartarian.
Hey, everybody, tune in to Recent Tartarian.
Recent Tartarians. Recent Tartarian.
Hey everybody. Well, I'm a little thrown off So, a couple things. One, I couldn't hear any of that. I just hoped that I knew what was going on. I don't know why I'm bothering with headphones. It's not working. The power went out yesterday. As I was finishing Adam's show, the door blew open, and there was like a hurricane, and I was very confused. And I pulled the door closed, but then I felt like I was going to get sucked out of the house, and then the power went out as the show was ending, which was crazy. So I went down to the basement, and the power came back on this morning, like 7:30 a.m., so a lot of like walking around with candles, and it was fun. Not a lot because I went to bed early, but then I stayed up because I was listening to a book on tape, which is funny, like you can't escape technology. And I was remembering this old book that I loved when I was young from Frederick Morton called Thunder at Twilight, which is about Vienna. And someone had asked me in the show what I thought about the Weimar Republic, or if I could do something on the Weimar Republic, and I was like, well, that's such a short and specific subject that it would be too clear to talk about just the Weimar Republic. Just kidding. You can't really just talk about something in like, you gotta understand the history of Germany and Prussia and Austria-Hungary. In my opinion, I think you have to understand these things in order to talk. To just say, oh well, this person changed their name to Guy, doesn't tell you a lot about who they were before they changed their name to Guy. So the Weimar Republic's kind of it's a longer subject than that. And at the end of the day, I could tell you all about Ottoman Empire again and how they controlled parts of Austria and Germany, or how Germany didn't exist as a technical term, really, until much afterwards. But I thought maybe it might make more sense to tell you about the year 1917, because for me, the year 1917, especially in Vienne, as it's actually called there, it's called Vienne, but Italians have called it Vienna, which tells you another interesting thing about Germanity, the Germania, and Romance culture. But in Vienne, they, you could say that 1913 to 1917, Vienne are kind of the American Pie years of Vienne. And I want to kind of explain to you why. Let me see if I can pull up my pictures and have it make sense. By the way, before I get too deep into things again, I just want to say, these videos are, as usual, not going to be monetized until later. This one especially, I don't know, who knows, because we're talking about things we're not supposed to talk about. So thank you for your support. If you go to Andreas.me and you support me there and, buy my shirts and stuff like that, like you guys have been doing, that's really great. I really appreciate it. And super chats and everything. I really appreciate the help so I can continue to make this content. Okay, so 1917, it all starts out with this hipster character who's probably in his 20s at the time, Schicklgruber. And I remember as a kid, I was walking down the street and there was this cracked out homeless guy, so I thought, who later told me he was a history teacher and, or had been one in his youth. And he's telling me about Schicklgruber. Don't you know about Schicklgruber? Emperor ran all of Germany, Schicklgruber. And I was like, who you mean? Are you talking about Adolf Hitler? And he's like, yeah, that's what I mean, Schicklgruber. Y'all just pronounce it funny. So I was like, who? Huh? But I was young, and it checks out. Like, so here's the deal with this character. Granted, not the only character involved, but just to point out the story, everyone's like, wait, so he was Jewish, but what's the deal with that? Well. So let me just go for it. Mayer Amschel Rothschild, and it's because it all ties together. I think that's why someone wanted me to tell this story. It all ties to the Balfour Declaration in a sense. And I'm going to go way deeper into the Balfour Declaration, but I want to explain, because people, wait, did this create Israel? Well, no, because then there's also the Havara Agreement, which really is, you have to imagine that there were several Havara agreements in the 1880s that involved Zionist Germans as well. And so really the Balfour Declaration just said, okay, well, there can be a homestead, but a homestead is not a state. And a homeland for a nation it's not a internationally technical term. And it really had more to do with trying to break up the Ottoman Empire, right? Because they'd just been involved in the war with the Ottoman Empire, and Britain was like, what are we going to do about let's carve it up. Well, what do we have there? Oh, Palestine. Well, who's in Palestine? Well, there's some Palestinians. But there's also a group of Jews that have been brought in by the Ottomans. Okay, so you can't find a point in history where they're not talking about resurgent Zionism. It's part of, the Germans are doing it, the French are doing it, the Ottoman Turks are doing it, the British are doing it. It's an everybody kind of game. Okay, but the weird thing is you get into this Mayer Amschel Rothschild character, right? Because one of the things that connects the Balfour Declaration is his brother, Walter Rothschild. I believe his brother. It might have been his uncle. I believe it's his brother. Anyway, Mayer Amschel. No. Yeah, okay. This is his uncle. It's the next generation back. This is the sons of the father. So, Mayer Amschel, father of international finance, rated 7th on Forbes magazine list of 20 most influential businessmen of all time. I'm not going to make this all about him, but I'm just going to let you know. There's a great musical also you can watch called Rothschilds and Sons, made by the guys who made Fiddler on the Roof, right? And so, if you are interested in Jerry Bach, the Bach saga, there's a whole other Bach saga. So basically, if you liked Fiddler on the Roof, you'll love Rothschilds, and it's got some amazing songs about taking over Europe. And he tossed a coin. He said, "Coin, it's up to you. Tell us what to do." Yeah, these are classic. This was 500 shows on Broadway, and I think in 2015, someone finally did something. I saw a couple YouTube clips of it. Great musical. Anyway, Mayer Amschel had a homestead in Austria, and he had a servant woman named Anna Maria Schicklgruber, right? And then she got pregnant and left the business and went home with a pension of a decent amount of money. We think something equivalent to $1,000 today a month, which at the time, you got to understand also Germany as not a real country and Austria as part of the Ottoman Empire, whenever not being respected by the Viennese were not in as much charge as they wanted to be. So Schicklgruber had a lot of money, right? And so let me see if I can just so she was the mother of this dude, Alois Heidler, right? Who's the paternal grandfather of and the paternal grandfather of Adolf. Okay, grandmother. I'm sorry, I keep doing this. So anyway, Heidler. It's funny that the name here says Hitler because we all know this is wrong. It's Schicklgruber, right? Alois Schicklgruber, and he had his mother married somebody else, and so the person had a different name, and it was Heidler. And they say because of a clerical error, it was Heidler. It was Hitler. It was supposed to be Heidler, but no. I mean, what's most likely is the stepfather didn't want his actual name put on, or some anal retentive Austrian in the bureaucratic system said, well, this isn't the right name. It's not the true father. Some crazy stuff like that. Because it was clear that this woman had, money from the Rothschilds. And so it's been relatively a popular story, right? And I wonder if I could find... No. Yeah, you're not going to see it in the Wikipedia page. So that's very interesting, but you can find it. Like, it's a pretty popular story. So that's something to know, really, just real quickly. Now, another thing, this beautiful looking picture that has been, face apped before technology existed is not what the steel man, comrade brother Stalin really looked like. If you were to look for like a smallpox Stalin, you'll see he had webbed toes and he had, airbrushed all of his smallpox off of his face and whatever. But also, he's about 10 years younger than than Lenin, and he was about 10 years older than Adolf was, and they were all in Austria, in Vienna at the same time. And that's the thing you got to imagine is 1913 and 1917, Austria lost all of its money, but it still had such cool stuff. And if you wanted to like eat a nice egg out of a ceramic dish, you could do it in Austria. And it's a beautiful city. Vienna is a beautiful city, and it survived simultaneously to the Ottomans controlling so much of their wealth as well. I mean, let's be real, Ottoman Empire, Ottoman Austria. Oh, was that something there? when you start to look into how much of it was really controlled by the Ottoman Empire, it's like, yeah, they had the Vienna didn't have any control. And this makes it more interesting when you find out about Austria-Hungary and Buda, right? Because similarly, the capital of Buda, which combined with Pest in the 1870s, I don't want to get too, that's a little earlier, and it's something that we could cover. That's considering it. Well, you know what? Let's do it. Okay, so first thing, the real thing I need to say, if I'm going to explain this story, it actually comes back to the Kingsman prequel comic book series and movies. And it's pretty good. In the movie, I think it's like 22 minutes and 33 seconds in, kind of a thing. That the father and the son, like who are the spies, are talking. And the father's like, they're in a train, and the son's like, oh, it's terrible. What happened to Uncle Ferdy and Aunt Soph, right? Because Uncle Franz Ferdinand and Sophia. And I got to cut my stories just to tell you like more backstory. So, Franz Joseph, who was like the longest ruling emperor, Franjo Josip Carlo, as we say in Croatia, actually, from all accounts, kind of decent guy, but he ruled with a thing called neo-absolutismus, right? Neo-absolutismus or neo-absolutism. You don't even find it in English. You have to translate it from the Deutsche Wikipedia. But it's this kind of continued absolutism. And you can see also when he was younger, this is this guy who was emperor for his whole life. He was very healthy, had a lot of energy. And you got to understand also, if you've never lived in Austria or Berlin or something, the kind of energy it takes to go to German parties or Austrian parties is just profound. To party all the time, you actually almost have to respect it. I do. And so, the fact that he was able to hold together this non-empire throughout his lifetime into the 20th century, and in a weird way, kind of he survived. It's really only Karl who failed, if you really want to think of it that way. Another important thing is with Franz Ferdinand. So his wait, is this the right one? Hold on, no. Yeah. Sorry. So there's a bunch of Sophias to connect this story together. So the mother of Joseph is Sophie of Bavaria, and I'm gonna tie it all together way faster in a second. But just kind of know that the Sophia Naturalization Act has happened in England, and Sophie is a different Sophie. And then the son, Franz Ferdinand, he falls in love with another Sophie, Duchess of Hohenberg, which is really, she's a Stuttgart, girl. You know what I mean? Like, this photo shows you how human Sophie really was. And people think of Franz Ferdinand, and so nobody does, actually. I think you guys just listen to MTV music about it at this point. I don't think anyone's like, and I don't blame you. You shouldn't spend your day worrying about Sophie Kodek, Duchess of Hohenberg, but or God forbid, Archduke Franz Ferdinand. But the thing about Sophie was she bothered the royal family, and Franz Ferdinand Ferdy was like, I don't really want to do this royal thing. And this is very common today. You hear this with Charles' kids, Harry and everything. But at the time, he's like, I'm down to do it as long as I can have my Sophie. I just want to have my Sophie. And he said, I will go the rest of my life as a virgin. I won't get married ever. Without Sophie, no Franzi, no Ferdy. That's it. And they're like, okay, well, you can do it. Because you gotta remember the other thing going on is the entire empire is falling apart. Not just the empire, the system of control is falling apart. Now I'm gonna go back and explain what I was trying to say. Okay, where's my thing? Oh no, yeah. Well, because I was just telling you the story, right? So the Ferdinand situation now, and you've heard a little bit about the two Sophies, like the younger and the older, the later Sophie. And the later Sophie came from a more important familial line, which connected the Franz Ferdinand, actually, and Franz Joseph to King George of England. At the time, George was the king of England, the fifth, I think. And then simultaneously, there's also another king-like figure, a Caesar-like figure, a Tsar Nicholas. Okay, so you've got the Romanovs, you've heard of them. You've got the czars, you got the kings, you got the emperors. But at the end of the day, what's really strange is that these were three cousins. That the emperor of Austria-Hungary, of Austria and Hungary and of the Slavic states, because they were trying to make a third face for the symbol of the Austro-Hungarian Empire is like two birds looking both directions, and they wanted a third face looking straight at you so this would have been the trifecta of the Slavonian Austro-Hungarian Empire up until Princip shot Ferdy. So anyway, cousins, I say. How are they cousins? Well, that's what's interesting about the Kingsman movie, because he kind of explains that their grandmother, all of them, was Queen Victoria. Okay, and so Queen Victoria of England kept them in line, and it's not just them. There's a fourth connection, and that's Kaiser Wilhelm. And so Kaiser Wilhelm then is considered to be the maniacal cousin, because they were all fighting each other when they were young, and Queen Victoria held it together, and now they're grown-ups, and for the most part, they can tell each other, when Serbia's got a lot of control issues by the Russians at the time. The Russians are supporting Serbia more and more because it's giving them access to the Balkans, and the kingdom of Serbia, at that point, it also sort of, de facto represents Croatia, whether we like it or not. So Croatians are dealing with that, but we're the coast, so everybody wants us. And so Russia's trying to take over to an extent, but 30 million peasants revolting in Russia at this time, right? 1917 is the end for Russia. So clearly taking over other places isn't working out for Russia. And there's letters to show that the royal cousins, these 3 to 4 brothers, essentially, even though they're a little more distant than that, they're probably closer connected than most royal family are anyway, because royals don't spend much time with each other, and these kids were forced to, in order to create this empire, this European empire that was really the grandsons of the queen, right? So the grand empire, if you can, of Victoria, of the Victorian age. But they knew that if you invaded here, it would just both sides. I forget if it was Wilhelm or I think it was Franz Joseph who said, if we were to attack each other, we would not be doing it ourselves. We'd be using our own troops, right? And our troops would end up working with each other to attack us and create a new state in between. And that sounds like a joke, but you look at Serbia, and that's literally what happened. Serbia was like, hey, we could be our own state, So there's that. Anyway, there was more to that point, but I'll get to it later. Sophie Kodek was not accepted as a normal royal. She was, anytime they went to Vienne, they weren't treated nicely. She wasn't allowed to go through the royal court systems and be treated the way a normal royal would be treated. And that really dug into Franz Ferdinand. And so Ferdinand was not happy with going to Vienne anymore because of this. Anyway, what's also important to know is the Mayday. Oh, but she was adorable. Let's just remember that. Okay. The Mayday celebration, Austria, Mayday. So Mayday, and this connects a lot to, we think of the Memorial Day connection to putting flowers down starting in the Civil War, but really flowers on graves goes back further, and it even goes back to the Ottomans who were doing this in Austria, because this was, a period where families on hills into the Cossack regions, lost a lot of people. And so they associate that. There's another example in the 1860s, but I'm going to show you something else actually really quickly, just to remind you. There was another point that was something I needed to say about Sophie. It's not just that Sophie the Older had control over Europe through her sons and connection to Victoria, but she also, her second son Maximilian, was the Emperor of Mexico. Okay, so people don't think about Mexico's imperial period that much, but it's really important to remember Mexico was a European imperial state, and a lot of the families in Mexico still to this day come from this period, either coming from Europe or coming from the United States after the Civil War. And so right before the Civil War especially, Europeans were in droves. So if you think of this Austrian Archduke who briefly reigned as emperor from April 10th, 1964 until his execution on June 19th, 1867, that you can see 1864 to 1867 is it's a continuation of the Civil War, right? The Civil War does not end in 1865. It continues on. And this is something to understand about wars, but also to understand about treaties and what happened to the imperial powers when it finally got to 1917, which I swear is really going to be the subject of this. Okay, and now let me see. And you got the hipster art everywhere. Austro-Hungary. Well, okay, a couple more little things to show you. So there's the Iron Ring. Something to know. I mean, I'm also trying to show you guys stuff I know that they're not going to teach you in history class, because you could go online and you can find out about the mainstream story. So the thing is, the Iron Ring in 1880 was a really important group of Czech and German, Bohemian and Moravian Slavs and Germans. And Edward Taft, Viscount Taft, was an Austrian statesman who was in charge in a lot of ways of founding the Iron Ring. He's also of peerage in Ireland because he's from his North Irish Viking family connect him to the United Kingdom. And when you find out how most of North England, a lot of the royal families do come from Germanic lines, but more interestingly, that so many German families have English Islander blood as well. It's very interesting that this connection starts to emerge. That has nothing to do with ideological politics. It's just thousands of years of proximity. Okay. Austrian Minister of Justice during the revolutions of 1848. So 1848 revolutions, you can kind of see they're not civil wars. They're not a war between the Turks. They're called revolutions. And this is an interesting thing because what you have is you have a number of nationalists. So there really is, there are Turks, there are Croats, there are Venetians, there are Serbs, there are Romanians. And they start to galvanize. Slavs become unique groups saying we're different. Hungarians have been featured in the Magyars, right? And so the Hungarians have been featured in a period of Hungarianization of Hungary. And this ends with, again, in 1870s, not ends, but really you see Buddha absorb pest, or pest absorb Buddha, however you want to look at it. Pest is larger, but the culture of Buddha is more invasive. I don't know how else to put it. And language of Hungary changes, and food of Hungary changes. And it's no surprise that then Hungary emerges as a land with a nightshade chili pepper. You know, I mean, this connection to nightshades and the magic of the Slavs and what the Turks were doing. There's a lot to say about Hungary, but again, we got to get to 1917. So, but we'll do something an entire day. You got to do an entire day at least just to start to understand the Magyars and what it means to be Budapest. Because Budapest. Little map just for some perspective. They were so big. How big were they? They were so big they literally just became one place, and that's a beautiful story. So we got to look into Buda and Pest a bit, but we'll save that for a later date. But Viscount Taft and the Iron Ring were able to consolidate control over some of Austria and this is why the Weimar Republic becomes more important, because at this point, Austria is not as powerful as people think they are, and it takes a number of serious mistakes by the Ottoman Empire for them to end up in power, plus the loss of Serbia by the Ottomans into the hands of and this is because the Janissaries, we were talking about the Ottomans and how they recruited Christian kids from these villages along the coast, especially, and they figured, but you can see the difference because the darker hair in Serbia is often connected with being more connected with the Turks and the Ottomans, right? And you can see that. And now I'm sure that'll offend somebody, but that's just the case. And then with the blonder looking characters, you see that they're connected with these imperial peerages of Scandinavians and Normans and etc. And that it just along the coast that starts to make sense. Now, again, also looking at Austro-Hungary, if you look at Austro-Hungaria, one of the things you'll notice is that it extended across from Italy all the way down into Montenegro. So all of the Slavic places, even I don't know, Slovenia is a little weird, but all of these places right here, even parts of Slovenia, are connected and controlled by the Austro-Hungarian Empire. So Slavic states are swallowed up. It's just the way it is. And they have more unity under this Europeanized union than they did before, because when they're independent, they're taxing each other, and there's all kinds of these little things going on. And so, okay, so you get the point. The Slavs are swallowed up. This also means that the Slavs can go to Austria. They can go to Vienne. And as time goes on, something that people don't seem to understand. Well, okay, one more thing before we get to that point. Because Austro-Hungarian Empire is so big at this point and run by one family, and this is why cousin Wilhelm becomes more important, because cousin Wilhelm, he's got all the Prussian support, and the Prussian support is separate, is the best way to put it. It's its own thing. It's not part of Scandinavia. It idolizes Scandinavia. It thinks that they're pretty women, and everything like that. But they're not. They're not Scandinavia. They're not really part of the English Isles anymore. They have redheads in mainland Rhineland, so there are definite and genetic connections, but they're isolated. And the Goths, you can almost compare them to the Dutch, but the Dutch, I don't know who would be more annoyed. Probably the Germans, to be compared to the Dutch. And so they're their own pot, and they wanted to be their own pot, but they ended up fighting for Austro-Hungary in order to be their own pot. And in doing so, they made themselves far more relevant. And at its territorial peak in 1870, they had control over regions that were, as Austro-Hungary had started to collapse, essentially, they had control of their own land. And that's why the Weimar Republic exists, because Prussia continues on. Prussia continues on without the help of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, technically. Now, it's not a perfect scenario. They lose, some of the territory, but then they gain back all the territory. And by the end of the Weimar Republic, once it's the Reich, they've controlled most of Europe, and they have France. And you saw the movies. So there's a lot of growth that happens to the Weimar Republic very quickly. But it's new money, okay? And this, you can tell this by looking at the Rhineland, and by looking at München, and by looking at all these areas of Germany where they've built their castles, because their castles are just obscene, and they're huge, and they're just, there's no reason for it. It's just too much. And so it's not even just it's also because you can tell that there are certain areas of Germany which are far older than the Weimar Republic is, right? The Weimar Republic is from 1919 until 1933, so arguably 1933. Depends on how you look at things. It really does. Everything depends on how you look at things, doesn't it? Okay. So Prussia, that's how Prussia happened. That's where the Weimar Republic happens. Meanwhile, you'd think that the Second Mexican Empire wouldn't matter to anybody, but really it's one of the most important parts of this, because you've got so much money from Americas escaping out, and I don't mean just from America or Canada or from Brazil, but I mean from the Americas, right? That are escaping out through Mexico, that Mexico becomes it's the essential player. It's the black market before there was a black market, when tariffs and everything. Paraguay is very important too, but Paraguay is today where you have airplanes. So at the time, coast on either side, and you have the Chinese, and you have the Russians, and you have the French, and just the amount, Mexico is just pivotally important. I don't know how else to put it in terms of trade. Everybody is working with each other through Mexico. And if you're not working directly with someone because they're part of some other axes or allies kind of scenario, which is the irony is that there's, one family with 3 or 4 brother cousins that are running the world right now. But, if that's happening, then you're working by proxy through Mexico. So Mexico becomes the centric point. And you'd think, what? How is this? How did I not know that Mexico is the number one thing in World War I? And, well, actually, it goes back, like I said, to the Civil War and a continuation of these powers. Now, we know that America had itself a trade network with England and with France, and this triangular trade network that had been originally a Brazilian, Portuguese trade network that they had gotten from what we think the Moors got from the Tartarians, blah, 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 ancient trade system, that this was the reason why Mexico became more and more important, and also why there were so many spies and OSS agents, or whatever you want to call them, that continued on after Pinkerton detectives went down into Mexico. So, Okay, I hope I pushed that point as hard as I needed to. The other thing is it's not the first Mexican empire, which was the constitutional Mexico. So this is more just in the hands of the Austro-Hungarian Empire because they are an elite ruling class family. The offering of the Mexican crown by a Mexican delegation. And you can see a lot of these guys actually look slightly more Mexican. I mean, maybe just Slavic or something, but you got to wonder, like, what's the deal here? Because this guy comes in with his giant Austrian beard and he runs everything. Well, the 1860s ended with the collapse of Mexico by the banks and with the amount of money that were, handed over. So the consolidation of power, granted there were guns involved because that's what they had spent their money on. A lot of it ended up just being decided after the military hostilities, like, were not as strong as people realized. There was a concentration of French troops in the Northern Republic strongholds of Mexico, only led to a surge of Republican guerrilla activity in the South. And so there wasn't a lot they could really do in order to stop being taken over by these European powers. And Maximilian's request for more aid, at least a delay in troops withdrawal, was declined because of a possible war against Prussia. Right? And this is something that the Austro-Hungarians were, dealing with in 1866, which is another reason why Prussia kind of emerged. And I was explaining during the 1860s how they were relying on help from Prussia and from the Slavic states. This is why Prussia became powerful, because they were important soldiers. And this is why Serbia became so important. And you got so many examples of these guys trying to shoot the emperor of Serbia. And then they'd be like, what was going on? What do you have a gun for? He's like, I was trying to get him. There's not like defense. It's like a proclamation. It's like, that guy is, standing up he's just like an annoying moron in the way for Serbians representing their own Serbian selves. And they're just happy to do it. So there was no way to hold together Serbia as part of the empire. And that was pretty obvious. And they were thinking, okay, well, what can we do about our colonial powers? Mexico is something that we might be able to control because there's just so many Europeans there that we could probably hold it together. Okay, now we're going to try to get to this 1917 idea. I kind of explained that because, Stalin's living in, and he was the USSR chief, but not at that time. At that time, he's just a 30-something chess player. And this is a funny story because what I found interesting was I always assumed that he was lying about everything. And it turns out, no, he really liked chess. I mean, I'm sure he lied a lot about chess and pretended he was better at chess than he was. But apparently he wasn't bad, and he could beat Trotsky and Lenin and a number of people at chess. So there's that. He loved chess. The other thing was, as a smallpox, webbed foot, dancing the waltz in Vienne wasn't going to be his main thing to do. And so trying to socialize this rube, I don't know what you were supposed to call Stalin, but it was not easy. And they ended up relying on Alexander Troyanovsky. Now, I don't know if you guys, again, with how many people talk about Troyanovsky, right? Like, Troyanovsky. You heard Troyanovsky? Now, next time you're at a party and you're talking about The Sound of Music or Austria or, I don't know. There's very few times where you're going to be able to, like, I got it. I had a friend who named a cat Troyanovsky. So now, I made that up, but you can just say that next time you see a cat in a tree or something. You have a bunch of firemen standing there and they're looking at a cat and they're like, what are we going to do? And you just say, oh, I had a friend who had a cat named Troyanovsky, named after Troyanovsky, who was the famous Austrian wealthy dignitary and debutante's husband who trained Stalin, tried to help Stalin become the firemen were like, dude, what are you talking about? But at very least, you'll have gotten the opportunity to practice talking about Troyanovsky in a sentence. Okay, so Troyanovsky. Here's another aspect of that story. Soviet flyers at the White House, Washington, D.C., June 28th. 3 Soviet flyers who conquered the North Pole route between the USSR and the United States are shown leaving the White House today after being received by President Roosevelt. In the photograph, left to right, is Georgy Badukov, a co-pilot, and Valery Chekolov, and Soviet ambassador Alexander Troyanovsky. Okay, so Troyanovsky ended up being more and more important as time went on. And one more thing, I just can't help it. Where's my little Trotsky? Do I have my Trotsky anywhere? Because that's going to matter. Trotsky. Oh, and you know what? I can do this even. No, yeah. I'll just do it. No. It's just that's a longer story. It's hard to decide stuff. Anyway, by 1918, Klimt was dead. So, the entire experience of Wien is Klimt. All right, and you can imagine how the 60s art posters were based on Klimt as well. I mean, now I'm not telling you that the Beach Boys or the Beatles are the best band, and if you wanted to, you should study Egon Schiele, and I frankly like Schiele more, but that's my problem. So I'm not going to say you gotta love Schiele, but Schiele's important. Just I'm not going to talk about him today. The point is, you can see how it wasn't even just Klimt. There was a bunch of art influenced by Arabs and what? That's right, Japanese art. So a guy who really understood Arabic art, and you can see it, the Persian mysticism and the geometric patterns, and and he was also an architect. And, he's a crazy painter-looking guy. And there's a lot of this going on in Austria at the time, and so his death is like, who's gonna be the next Klimt? And just again with like, do you want to understand parties in Wien? Like, you want to be there, dude. It's the American Pie that you couldn't have. It is the classier Great Gatsby. It's just everything. So it's just a beautiful, colorful, painted with gold kind of place, and that's going on. Okay, I can talk about that way too long, so I'm going to move on to our Leon Trotsky story. So Lev Davidovich Bronstein, who invented the term racism, and he did so in order to talk about the Tartars, and this came up at some point. I'm going to read it another time. I almost feel like maybe I should read it now. Maggot sent me a thing on from Marx talking about the Tartars and the Tartar horde, but Trotsky did the same thing, talking about the Tartar horde, this idea that the Tartar horde was this dangerous group of fools to be used by the Ottomans, and how we should be using them instead, and the dangers there. Let me see if I can find this. I have it somewhere. Okay, here we go. I found it. Thanks, Maggot, for sending me this. Karl Marx wrote about the Tartars in Secret Diplomatic History of the 18th Century, particularly in Chapter 5, as I've read so far. Gutenberg Files, right? The Tartar yoke lasted from 1237 to 1462, more than 2 centuries. A yoke not only crushing, but dishonoring and withering the very soul of the people that it fell prey. The Mongol Tartars established a rule of systematic terror, devastation, and wholesale massacre forming its institutions. Their numbers being scanty in proportion to their enormous conquest. They wanted to magnify them by a halo of consternation and to thin by wholesale slaughter the populations which may rise in the rear. In their creations of desert there were, besides, led by the same economical principle which has depopulated the highlands of Scotland and the Campania de Roma, the conversion of men into sheep, and of fertile lands and populous abodes into pasturage. The Tartar yoke had already lasted 100 years before Muscovy emerged from its obscurity. To entertain discord amongst the Russian princes and secure their servile submission, the Mongols had restored the dignity of the Grand Princedom. The strife amongst the Russian princes for this dignity was, as modern authors has it, an object strife. The strife of the slaves, whose chief weapon was calumny, and who were always ready to denounce each other to their cruel rulers, wrangling for a degraded throne whence they could not move, but with plundering, periodical hands, and hands filled with gold and stained with gore, which they dared not ascend without graveling, nor retain but on the knees. Okay, so you get on, he's going to have a whole thing on how the Tartars were violent and trained to be peasants. The Muscovy rising by means of the Tartar yoke, and the Muscovy getting an independent power by the disappearing of the Tartar rule. The whole policy of Muscovy from its first entrance in the historical arena is resumed in the history of these two individuals. So it's interesting because that is something that is pushed also by Trotsky. Trotsky's saying that that Serbianism, that's Pan-Slavism, it's the wrong value focus. It should be focused on ideology. And Carl's saying they're talking about the Huns versus the Tartars. We're going to get into this point where different groups of people, Huns, Khans, Shoguns, whatever, they all are stemming from thinking like the Mughals think they're the Mongols, right? And the Magyars, we're going to talk about how the Hungarians and the Huns and people that really believe that they descended from Genghis Khan, this redhead, green-eyed ruler, that was completely normal to think everyone did, and in a lot of ways, we just say they didn't. So we've got that, but I just wanted to point out that's why Trotsky was talking about racism, because he's like, dude, this isn't the most important value that we have. We have to be very careful about race, and it's going to be the thing that unites so many people. We have to be very careful about it. Now, there are a lot of issues with Trotskyism. I'm not really a Trotskyist, but there are nights when you're a Stalinite. There are moments where you think authoritarianism does what it's supposed to do, where there's a bunch of monsters in the world, and you're just like, wow, yeah, actually, if you just use an eraser, you can do a lot. But there are other moments where you might sympathize with Trotsky. By the way, Trotsky was stabbed to death with an ice pick in Mexico City. How's that for your Austrian-Mexico Revolution conspiracy, which led to the 1968 Olympics, slowly but surely, generation later, and a number of socialist Mexican-American kids were killed, in Mexico City. But Trotsky had looked at Stalin coming in and being there with, sorry, I just lost what we were, what's his name again? Oh yeah, Troyanovsky. So Troyanovsky and his wife, and so let's go back to the picture again because it tells the story better. So Troyanovsky, fancy intellectual guy, who's a bridge player with his wife, very good at bridge, and they, and again, a Russian sympathizer. Interesting, the intelligentsia and the intellectuals in Austria at the time who weren't like Stalin, right? Stalin was this pockmarked buffoon. And Trotsky was not. Trotsky was far more fancy in a lot of ways. I'm losing my pictures too fast. There we go. Push it back to the same area so I can see him at the same time. So Trotsky was looking at this situation and wondering what to do because he was far more educated. And this is 1924, so imagine 10 years earlier than that. He's in his 30s, and you can see, or late 30s. But Vladimir Lenin, also a bridge player, also a chess player, also not from Russia, right? Actually, you can see born early childhood. Great grandparents were Russian, blah, 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 blah. Early childhood. They don't even try to show you where, he's born. Where does it say? Born, where does it say? They're not even going to show you. They're trying to hide it so hard, because he's German. Like, he's born in Germany. Simbursk. I don't know. That's kind of right here. Look at this. Are you going to buy that? I don't know. Okay, so you got a German dude who was pretending to be not German. He spoke French perfectly. He spoke German perfectly. He spoke Russian pretty perfectly, and in an intellectual way. And that's a big difference as well, because Stalin spoke Georgian, and Stalin learned how to speak Russian, and Stalin learned how to speak French, and Stalin learned how to speak German, and Stalin could speak these languages pretty well. And again, was a chess master. So not the dumbest guy in the world. We'd love to just say, oh, the evil guy was dumb, because it's a lot less terrifying to say that an evil guy's stupid. It's just not real. So then you just have to also talk about Engels just really quickly. Sorry. Friedrich Engels, a German philosopher who designed Marxism, really, and we call it Karl Marxism, but most of it's not even written by Marx. And these ideas that came to Lenin were a lot of time Engelian in origin. Now, Marx also was a philosopher who was detached from the peasant, because he never really was a peasant. So he kind of imagined how cool it would be to be a rap star. And Engels was a bit more an intellectualist. That's why I bring this up, because so was Trotsky. Trotsky was an intellectualist. He was part of this group called the intelligentsia, and believed that the intelligentsia needed to be, everyone had their thoughts, right? He thought the intelligentsia needed to be divorced from the aristocracy, from nepotism, and that a new merit-based intelligentsia would emerge, meaning that the intelligentsia could continue to evolve, because right now they're being held at only what the aristocracy can allow, And soon there'll be even better intelligent, even smarter and more intelligent intelligentsia, because it'll just be based on whoever's the most intelligent. Little did he know that the idea of intelligentsia had become the weapon of the Workers' Party. That they were saying that intelligentsia was the problem, not exploitation by the capitalists anymore. And he got scared. And but in 1917, thinking. Everyone, I think, had this universal feeling that, it was super cheap to live in Vienne and you could afford to do it. And it had been this great city. And maybe everyone someday could afford to live in Vienne or something like it. So many of them thought, wow, how great this is. And we're all going to be able to have a new generation raised in ubiquitous wealth from Vienne. And maybe this war has helped us out. And then Stalin's thinking to himself, no, like, this sucks because I don't like to go to parties, right? And so when that, and Trotsky's seeing this, and he's seeing this buffoon stump into after one wakes up, and he's out all night, and he's pockmarked face. He doesn't go to the parties, and he's drinking, and and he's like this weird introvert who's obsessed with chess to an extent at first, but then everyone's really pushing for him, and so he becomes this popular figure because Stalin will erupt, and he'll shake up a party when he walks in drunk, and it's just. There's something about this guy, so he does well for the party, and they're thinking, what are we going to do? And Lenin says, we'll train him to be, we'll get Trotsky to train him to be good at bridge and to be a popular person. It just doesn't work, It doesn't work at all. Meanwhile, right, you've got this, during the moment of the hipster Hitler and Chad Stalin, you get the super poor, Adolf is this, he's living, painting pictures of dogs in he's got this cubicle, and he's younger also. So younger often equals more idealism, and he's, this is a big issue. He can't get into the parties that Stalin doesn't want to go to, and this really does change the dilemma, right? All right, just want to point that out about Vienne. So simultaneously, you've got. Let me also make sure I cover. I got neo-absolutism. Okay, and then, so I mentioned to you how nobody likes Sophie, the younger, and a lot of people didn't like Sophie the older. Completely different Sophies. And then there's Gavrilo Princip. And I told you about a few examples of people trying to kill Franz Ferdinand and his wife. And a lot of people will tell you that this whole Sarajevo thing was, a complete accident. And it's crazy that this happened. Well, dude, the fact that they went to Serbia was ridiculous. To go to Sarajevo was dangerous, and they knew that it was not really, they had no control. And the irony being that Ferdinand was trying his best to represent the Slavs. He really wanted the Slavs to feel represented, and there was just such great propaganda against him. He was saying, look, would you rather be a member of the Ottoman Empire? Or do you want to, would you rather be Janissaries to the Turks, right? Or do you want to be a Slav, and he had pretty good propaganda. But the thing was, they didn't want either. They wanted to be Serbian. And the Serbian Empire technically existed. And they were thinking, well, we don't want to be like Mexico and these other places, which deservedly are run by Austrians. We are special, right? And that's literally how it's the hypocrisy and irony of World War I just kind of blows your mind. But young Bosnia was this kind of gang of post Janissaries. It included Muslims and Croats and different groups of people that were saying, hey, yeah, we should definitely be our own people. I like that guy. Look at that guy right there. Well, I feel like I could deep fake myself in there. And anyway, these guys were trying to, and rightfully so, represent Slavic ideas of Pan-Slavism, blah, blah, blah. Problem being, Pan-Serbia was not Pan-Slavia, and this led to a new kind of nationalism where the Serbians were genociding, literally, Croatians, Armenians, Slovenians to an extent, into the mid-90s. And that's, 1990s, right? So that's things that you think are impossible to an extent sometimes. Like, yeah, there are soccer fields of graves. We don't need to go too deep. But just imagine, right? Just imagine for a second that, you get past all of those characters into Charles I, right? And Charles I is another important character. When's he born? 1887. Great. So he's just about old enough to be partying with all of these dudes in Vienne, and here's the final emperor, Charles I of Austria, before the Weimar Republic, before everything happens. I mean, literally, I think he dies after the Weimar Republic has existed for like a year and a half, and he's executed. And he's a nice enough guy, and it's a bummer. And you don't hear anything about Charles I, Karl I. He's just, And another interesting point is that Charles I of England, another descendant, is his great uncle or great uncle, would have been Queen Victoria's great uncle, right? Is that right? Or uncle? I think that's how it works. You know what? Who cares? Point is, they're related. And Charles I of England lost his head, lost his throne, led to a democratic England that Cromwell ran for a while until they finally succeeded in escaping from the totalitarian dictatorship that is democracy in England. And the exact same story happened to Charles I of Austria. Karl I was disposed. I don't remember if he was beheaded. Is that right? Hold on, let me see here. Is that wrong? Exiled? Yeah, he died of respiratory failure. Okay, so he was poisoned to death, okay? So they send him to the island of Madeira, which was beautiful, and you could pretend that he had some sort of a... No, I'm not going to pretend even for it. Like, he was poisoned to death. And so, disposed, poisoned, and beatified by Pope John Paul II. He's venerated by the Catholic Church as Blessed Karl of Austria. So there's a lot more to this character. Anyway, a big reason I wanted to tell you all these stories is because it really comes down to this idea of Mayday in Austria. That was the other part, Mayday, Austria. And this is still a big deal today in Austria. They have Mayday parades and Mayday ritual where, when spring comes in these Germanic places and there's been a bit of wintertime, flowers will be put in lederhosen. Girls will put them in their shirts and their hats, and Tyrolean hats, men will wear. And one of celebration of bright colors because it gets so gray. I mean, look how gray this place looks already. And imagine covered in soot. And the flowers come, and spring is just, it's important thing. So everyone starts wearing lots and lots of flowers, and they have the May Day parade with maypoles, and you can start to connect these ideas to Scandinavian paganism and the celebrations that have existed for a long time, even during the Turkish times, connecting to Islam and beyond Islam, though, because there's these universal Gnostic and pagan ideas which weren't nearly as crushed by the Ottomans as they were by the Catholic Church. Okay, so May Day starts to happen. And then May Day rituals, you have these celebrations, you have these parties, and there are Ottomans, there are Turks, there are Muslims, but there are Christians, but there are atheists. There are new groups of atheists that are emerging, and there are these parties that are happening. And, at a party, you see, Adolf is trying to get into the party. Stalin is trying to leave before he even gets there, and he's drunk before he arrives. Trotsky is just got his hand in his face, and he's like, how am I supposed to train these people? How am I supposed to make sure that that Stalin's going to be okay? Lenin is paying money to get people in, to bribe people, walking around the bald, powerful alpha figurine. And let's see, Sophie's there for Ferdinand, and they don't want to be there because they hate Vienne because they're not treated right, which is why they end up trying to go to Serbia so often, the country that ends up killing them in the first place, because they're in the last place, because they're trying to become more Serbianized, become more Slavic, and to represent a people they think, well, if our people won't take us, maybe the Serbians will. Irony there. There's more. Oh yeah, and then Trotsky's like, dude, look at him. Look at all. Why is Stalin shoving so many eggs into his mouth? At the party, and it's just there's just so much hope going on because everyone wants to be, Klimt. Adolf wants to be the next Klimt. He knows he's not gonna be. Art is changing. Europe is changing, and then you get that word that the war's basically over. That Austro-Hungary is falling. Not quite, but it's into the hands of Karl, and the Weimar Republic is going to rise, and maybe the new powers will be north, and so it's time for the youth to head north. And so all these kids that are in Austria are thinking, well, I got to get out of here. I got to get to the Weimar Republic. And then, people are in the room are arguing with each other because some are saying, well, what we really should do is we should go to France and we should get our act together and then we can take over. And then others are saying, no, we already have it figured out. Let's just go to Russia. I mean, we already have all the power we need. We are Russia. We can do this. So that's kind of the beginning, leading up to the Weimar Republic. And then it ends, in a sense, when you get to the Treaty of Saint-Germain and the Treaty of Trianon. Treaty of Saint-Germain the victorious allies of World War I on one hand and the Republic of German Austria on the other. Okay, so that white line across the flag, in a weird way, tells you what happened better than anything. No offense, Austria. But what ended up happening was they were told, you guys are going to have to pay for everything, all forever. And it was just, this meant that, the carving up of the territories, the loss of the states of the Slovene, Croats, and Serbs, parts of Austro-Hungary going back into the hands of Hungary or Romania, but really being controlled more and more. And Germany, the Weimar Republic, in so many ways, left to deal with the debts of Austro-Hungary as well, because they had been an ally of Austro-Hungary, even though they were saying, dude, we got to get out of this. This is crazy. Like, what are we doing? Like, we're going to lose now. So Weimar emerges with this war debt, which is destroying Germany for a decade until Hitler decides his economic policies, which you can say on one hand, wow, great economic policies, but on the other hand, just not paying your debts. Of course, if you don't pay your debts, that works. So I mean, it's not like a brilliant economic policies per se. I think a lot of people mix that up. And it's also important to remember that Germany itself isn't obsessed with politics as much as we think it is. They're obsessed with economy and with environment, right? Ecology and economy matter. The runnings of the house and the runnings of nature fascinate a good German. But I don't think democracy is something like, not every German was like, oh, we need democracy, or oh, we need this or that. And so, of course, those who were so interested in voting were able to move into power certain groups of people that, and this is another thing, everyone's going to agree with not paying war debts. I mean, in your country, because if you can't afford bread and you can just make it so people can afford bread, yeah, I mean, but everything that comes with politics, and I think this is an important thing to remember about Germany, a lot of dudes living out in the country weren't paying attention. You go out to Germany now, and you'll find country bumpkins that can barely speak English, or German, rather. I mean, I've heard some pretty coarse Midwestern German from Germans. And in Austria, well, if it's not obvious that Austrian accent comes from an Arabic accent, then I don't know how to help you. I mean, listen to Arnold Schwarzenegger speak, and then listen to Ojalá, Salam Aleikum. Like, if you start to listen to the sounds that were made by Turks and made by Janissaries, and the language in the Arabian language, Arabic, as well as Parsi, and some of these, we're going to have to cover just some of these weird instances where, for instance, in Spain, there's 11,000 Arabic words. In Germany, there's 20,000 Arabic words that have made their way into German. And a lot of Germans aren't even aware of this, right? So it's important to know that this was a confusing idea. This was Austria, this was Hungary, this was Germany. This was not Ottoman Empire. And, simultaneously, there's another map that says this was the Ottoman Empire. And very soon we'll get Vienne, right? And Vienne will be ours, and that's the plan. So important to check out. But this was the dissolution of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and even worse than the Solnay was the Treaty of Trianon, which in Versailles, and this kind of ended World War I once and for all. And it split the Kingdom of Hungary in a lot of ways from the rest of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. So you can see the area that were allocated to be neighboring countries. So all these groups that were in the Kingdom of Hungary, 48% of the entire population of the Kingdom of Hungary, so less than 50% were technically Hungarianized by 1910. That means that there were a lot of people moving into Budapest in the 19th century to make that happen, because if you look at Hungarians in Hungary 100 years earlier, it's more like 20 or 19%. So 50%, very impressive odds that they were almost able to do it, to make their whole country quote unquote Hungarian, whatever that really ends up meaning about the Magyars, about Janissaries. But you can tell it's a European Ottoman Empire. It's a Christianized Ottoman Empire. In a lot of ways, it is the remnants of the Ottoman Empire's Janissaries that were not super Muslim, not super Christian either, because they were literally soldier class people. And there were a lot of architects, military architects that were brought in. As the empire got bigger, the military got more intelligent. Okay, but this led to Czechoslovak Republic, Kingdom of Serbs, Croats, and Slovenes, Kingdom of Romania, and the First Austrian Republic. And that was kind of the beginning of the end for everybody up until the Weimar Republic starts. I think that it's not a bad thing. Let me make also sure, is there things I'm missing here that I should be covering? I'm gonna look at super chats if there's anything. No, we're good. That's not bad at all. No problem, guys. Just making sure I wasn't missing any. I guess I could talk a bit about the World Finance Corporation and the CIA. That kind of grows out of this. I think maybe it's better to save that for another day because it's a later subject. So let me jump back to Troianovsky stuff. I can go to the Berlin Conference. So this is a little earlier, but this also matters because earlier when we were talking about Battle of Basra, I don't think we even got to Battle of Bathsheba. These are things that probably would be worth bringing up, but to do this, I'm going to have to go through the 1880s a little bit harder. So we talked about how Europe was dividing up Austro-Hungary in the 20th century, and I forget how deep we got into the 1880s, but I talked to you a little bit about the Iron Ring and neo-absolutism. There we go. The Iron Ring. One of the things about the idea of the Iron Ring was in order to create, under Viscount Taft, this larger Germanic empire. We're all Germans here, like all over the world. And there were Germans in South America, Germans in Croatia, on the Dalmatian coast, which is what connected the Ustashi in World War II to the Slavs. And pan-Germanism was kind of being applied in the 1880s, mainly because there was not a Germany, right? There was just these people that were Germans, but they were living in Prussia and Ottoman Empire, and all that. So they're like, hey, what if there was a Germany? That would be an interesting. What if there was a national homeland for the German people? And I mean, this idea of anti-Semitism is categorically false in the 1880s. You really can't. It's not true. Like they were not. The Pan-Germans were not anti-Semites. They were working on creating a Semitic state with the Havar agreements, predecessors in the 1880s. So it's just there were some, what is what it is. But what it comes down to is that starts to emerge. Anti-Semitism in Germany starts to emerge out of anti-Islam Ottomania, like fear of the Muslims, fear of the Jews, fear of Ottomania. And again, the Ottomans having Jews in their states being respected, that bothers a certain subset of Janissary groups. So it's the poorer groups, the farm groups they're thinking, hey, how come their town's not being burned down? Why is our town being burned down? That starts to emerge. And then after World War I, it becomes really easy to say, oh, well, the Germans, they have nothing because they're paying all these war debts. And you know who has everything? Them. They have food. And so the argument becomes fat German, skinny Jew, and it's no, got it backwards. But that's what happened. They decided that they were going to be the enemy for this PR campaign, which you can see it doesn't sell very well in Germany up until after everything else. No smoking campaigns, huge in Germany under the Third Reich, under the end of the Weimar Republic. Anti-Semitism, not so much. It lasts like 5-6 years into it. Then finally they have 100% control over the media machine, and they're like, we really gotta hate these people. Another important thing to remember. No, I'm not saying that Germany wasn't a dictatorship and going through the same things, but just remember that Britain's a monarchy. It's a dictatorship. America is an oligarchy. It's a dictatorship. The Ottomans were a dictatorship. These are all empires and dictatorships. So Germany is a country where it emerges from the Weimar Republic with this pseudo-democracy where they've elected a leader. Now, I'm not saying it was elected fairly or anything weird like that. Regardless. I'm not saying it's not. I'm just saying that's their pitch. Whereas other people are saying, well, we are better than you and we're able to rule. So the narrative is very confusing because it's hard to find a group of people who don't think that they're God's chosen master people. It seems like that's literally everyone's narrative. That's the Zionist narrative as well. So there's not a lot of difference there in the story until you get to the point where, near the end it becomes very specific. So we're focusing just on the beginning of the Weimar period. So anyway, we were talking about the African Treaty, or the West African Conference. The Berlin Conference is called. The Congo Conference is the way I was taught it in school. This was the idea that European colonialization around the world and what was going to happen to Africa, that the Germans would have a strong say in the matter in the 20th century, starting in the 1880s. And they'd already been there. And trade in Africa during the new imperialist period coincided with Germany's sudden, if you can call it that, large emergence as an imperial power, collective Germany. The conference was organized by Otto von Bismarck, the first chancellor of Germany. Its outcome, the General Act of the Berlin Conference, can be seen as the formalization of the scramble for Africa, but some scholars of history warn against an overemphasis of its role in the colonial partitioning of Africa and draw attention to the bilateral agreements concluded before and after the conference. Now, I agree, actually. You can't just say everything was Germany, because clearly Britain and France and the Netherlands and, Belgium. Think about Belgium. These things matter far more. But Germany agreeing, you know what? Everybody's doing it. We're going to do it too. That's a fair observation. Germany saying this is what's going on. And so 14 countries being represented, 6 of them, Austria-Hungary, Russia, Denmark, Netherlands, Sweden, Norway, and the United States, came home without any formal possessions in Africa. So prior to the conference, European diplomats approached the government in Africa in the same manner as they did in the Western Hemisphere, by establishing a connection to local trade networks. In the early 1800s, the European demand for ivory, which was then often used in the production of luxury goods, led many European merchants into the interior markets of Africa. European spheres of power and influence were limited to coastal Africa at this time, as Europeans had only established trading posts. But as time went on, they took over those trading posts, and those trading posts became sovereign cities. And King Leopold II of Belgium had founded and controlled the International African Association the same year, inviting Henry Morton Stanley to join him in researching and civilizing the continent. In 1878, the International Congo Society was also formed with more economic goals, but still closely related to the former society. So it's the most important thing is carving up Africa. And we think today, where are the poorest people? And you could ask the same question, where are the most resources for technology, for futurism? Where's gold, diamond, silicone, cobalt, copper mines? The entirety of the poorest places are the places with the most resources. And it's not starting then, but in a lot of ways it is, because it's so incredible how much of the world is carved up during the Congo Convention. And that begins this idea that there's more wealth that's coming into Germany. There's a cultural merger happening. France is merging with Africa. And today it's become very clear that that Macron is supporting this idea that the Franco-Africans are French, and that the culturally French matter. And this is something that Germany was arguing with themselves over. Well, are we German? Are we ideologically German? Trotsky starting to point out this argument as well, saying, hey, we could avoid this whole argument by making this about the intelligentsia. Unfortunately, the intelligentsia collapses in the Soviet ideology and becomes all about becoming a peasant or proletariat or someone who is beneath the intelligentsia, because the intelligentsia has tangented, according to the Soviet mentality, away from the benefits of the people. So there's a lot going on right there. And I think that's a strong amount to give you, just so you can kind of get your bearings on what was going on with the Austro-Hungarian Empire. I would recommend read Thunder at Twilight by Frederick Morton. Very important book. And also you could watch some of the Young Indiana Jones episodes, because there are some things where he ends up meeting with Franz Ferdinand, with Franz Joseph. I think he even sees Sophie. There's some value there. But again, focus on that point that Queen Victoria's grandsons are Wilhelm, Romanov, and Franz Joseph. And then there's the other one. as well. So there's a lot of royalty that's just focused on being at this one point the grandson empire. Now I'm gonna look through some of these. Have you heard of Baron Rudolf von Stotendorf? Yes, I have, and we could get into that. Someone also wanted me to do something on Saint-Germain and Sufi mysticism, so I might be able to get into Stotendorf. That's not a bad idea. I could do a video on that. Someone also wanted me to talk more about the Balfour Declaration and Proclamation. I think I have to go deeper into the Ottoman control of Palestine in order to explain how Israel didn't just come to be. It's like a bit more gradual than that. But you have to remember there were Jews who were allowed to live in Ottoman territories. So Palestine was one of them. And that's a big reason that matters. Let's see here. Frosty liked the Ewing Jr. videos. Yes, thank you. I hope you enjoyed the other. There's 3 of them. So I hope you saw the oldest one and the newest one. Omega Point asked if anyone listens to MTV anymore. I think Exertus killed the MTV star or something. It's a working title. We'll come up with something better than that. Well, I think that covers all the things I needed to cover today, guys. And you can go outside now. So thank you very much. Like, subscribe, share, go to exertus.com, go to andreas.me, buy my t-shirts, buy my fanny packs. You know, I appreciate it. And yeah, keep super chatting if you want more things said. I know RC wanted an episode on the Weimar Republic. He might be annoyed that this was technically on a lot of other things than just the Weimar Republic, but I hope that kind of helped. And if that wasn't exactly what you wanted, if you specifically wanted me to just tell you the ravings of Adolf Hitler in jail or something like that, I can do that, I guess. It's just, there's just so much more going on. And really, I think the important lesson here is even if he hadn't been there in Austria and in Germany, right, somebody else would have. And his connection to Rothschilds and to Schicklgruber, to the Alois Hitler story, it matters to know that he was allowed to get to that point and was used, and at a certain point was very frustrating to them. Now, we didn't go into the collapse of the Reich because that's even more brutal, and I wonder how we're going to get away with that. But the History Channel did it, so I'm sure we will be able to as well. Watery says he can't afford my t-shirts. If that's the case, just remember there are sales once a month on the TeePublic website, and the ones below that you're looking at on the YouTube, those are the fanciest shirts. If you go to andreas.me/store or exertus.com/store, I have a second store for the fans, which are slightly cheaper. They don't have wraparound designs, it's just the front of the shirt, but they're still pretty sweet and they look pretty cool, and you can start a conversation that way. So hope that helps. And the main reason I do the t-shirts, besides that you can start conversations with them, is because in case you feel like you're not getting enough from the content itself or something like that, you know, you don't want to just donate or whatever, but you know, just feel free. Like you can do $1 in the exertus.com thing directly, or Patreon. You don't have to at either, but if you're wondering how you can do that, you can. So I appreciate it. All right. Peace and love, everybody. Tomorrow, I think we're going to cover more of the church committee hearing stuff and Cord Meyer and his wife's affair with Kennedy. I think that would be fun. All right. Take care.
Hey, everybody, tune in to Recent Tartarian.
Recent Tartarian. Recent Tartarian. totalitarian. Recent totalitarian. Recent totalitarian.
Hey, everybody, tune in to Recent Tartarians.
Recent totalitarians. Recent totalitarian.
Hey, still trying to get a Croatia shirt from Exertis? Now you can get all the great Exertis Croatia shirts you ever wanted on sale now while the time and supplies last. Make sure you go to exertis.com/store to get the special sneak link if you want to get your Croatia shirt. They're $14 right now. Save 36% for the next 2 days and 23 hours. So just about 3 days worth there. You can get them in any color you want. See, look, I'm not even lying. You can get them in gray, which actually looks pretty sweet. Or blue was kind of this crazy idea. I like that. That's out of control. You can celebrate your Slavic diversity right there. Or get some other fine Exertis products. All right? Schickelgruber. Take care of yourself, people.